You've entered the archives of the forgotten. I'm Dr. Haunted. Tonight I'll show you what was never meant to be seen. Just remember, once you know the truth, you can't unsee it. Sleep paralysis first visited me during my junior year of college. I'd heard about the condition in psychology class, temporary inability to move while falling asleep or waking up, often accompanied by hallucinations. The professor described it as harmless, just your brain's sleep cycle getting confused. She was wrong. It started simply enough. 3 nights a week I'd wake unable to move, feeling like invisible weights pressed down on my chest. The episodes lasted maybe 30 seconds before I could wiggle my fingers and break free. Frightening, but manageable. Then I started seeing him. A tall figure in a dark coat would stand in the corner of my dorm room, perfectly still, watching me struggle against the paralysis. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. He never moved, never spoke, just observed. My roommate Jake thought I was stressed about finals. "It's just your brain playing tricks," he said. Classic sleep deprivation hallucination. But the figure appeared every night now, and he was getting closer. First the corner, then the foot of my bed, then standing directly beside me. During the worst episodes, I could feel cold breath on my face. I researched sleep paralysis online, finding comfort in scientific explanations and other similar experiences. The shadow figure was common, so common he had a name, the Hat Man. Thousands of people reported identical encounters with a tall, dark figure wearing an old-fashioned hat, but their experiences were isolated incidents. Mine was becoming a nightly torment. The breakthrough came when I discovered my dorm's history. Hartwell Hall was built in 1923, and buried in the university archives was a disturbing incident from 1954. A student named Walter Grimm had died in room 237, my room. Walter had suffered from severe insomnia and depression. According to his roommate's statement, Walter would stand by his bed for hours each night, staring at him sleep. The roommate had requested a room change just days before Walter was found dead, apparently from heart failure. The medical examiner noted Walter's unusual posture. He'd died standing up, leaning against the wall in the corner of the room. That night, I waited for the paralysis to begin. When the familiar weight settled over me, I forced myself to remain calm and observe. The figure materialized in his usual corner, Walter's death spot. But this time I noticed details I'd missed before. His coat was old-fashioned, like something from the 1950s. His hat was a fedora, slightly askew. And his face, though shadowed, bore the gaunt features of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. "Walter," I whispered, though my mouth couldn't move. He turned his head slightly, the first movement I'd ever seen him make. When he spoke, his voice was like wind through dry leaves. "Can't sleep. Haven't slept since you died. Tried to wake him up, my roommate. Tried to tell him about the dreams, the nightmares, but he wouldn't listen. No one listened." I understood then. Walter wasn't causing my sleep paralysis, he was trapped in it. 70 years of being unable to move, unable to speak, unable to rest. His presence triggered my episodes because his own paralysis was so powerful, it affected the room itself. "You want to sleep," I said. So tired. So very tired. The next morning I visited the university chaplain and arranged a small memorial service for Walter. Jake thought I'd lost my mind, but he helped me research Walter's life. We learned he'd been an art student, passionate about painting but struggling with mental health issues that weren't understood in his era. That night, I spoke to Walter during the paralysis episode. "You don't have to watch over anyone anymore. You're not responsible for others' sleep. You can rest now." For the first time, Walter moved from his corner. He approached my bed slowly, his face becoming clearer. He looked young, maybe 20, with kind eyes marked by exhaustion. "Thank you," he whispered. "I can hear them now, the dreams calling me home." Walter smiled, tipped his hat, and faded away like morning mist. I never experienced sleep paralysis again, but sometimes, on quiet nights, I feel a gentle presence, not threatening, but peaceful. Walter found his rest, and in doing so, gave me mine. The university later installed a small plaque in the dorm lobby honoring students who'd struggled with mental health, including Walter Grimm. Below his name, someone had carved, "May you find the peace that eluded you in life." Rest well, Walter. You've earned it. Moving into our first apartment together should have been exciting. Sarah and I had dated for 2 years, and the cute one-bedroom in the historic Riverside district seemed perfect for young professionals starting out. The building was constructed in 1889, with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and period details that attracted us despite the slightly higher rent. Our landlord mentioned the apartment had been vacant for several months, but attributed this to the competitive rental market. Everything was wonderful until Sarah started having sleep paralysis episodes. They began 2 weeks after we moved in. Sarah would wake in the middle of the night, unable to move, feeling a heavy presence in the room. She described seeing a woman sitting on the edge of our bed, an elderly lady in a vintage nightgown, grey hair in curlers, watching Sarah with intense curiosity. "She's not threatening," Sarah explained, "just invasive, like she's studying me." I was skeptical until I witnessed an episode myself. Sarah lay rigid beside me, eyes wide with terror, making small whimpering sounds. I could see her trying to move, muscles straining against invisible bonds. The episode lasted nearly 5 minutes before she could speak. "She was there again," Sarah gasped. "Right where you're sitting." She reached out and touched my face. I researched the building's history and discovered our apartment had been home to Edith Crane from 1954 until her death in 2019. Edith had lived alone for the last 30 years after her husband passed away. Neighbours described her as increasingly isolated, rarely leaving the apartment. According to the obituary, Edith died in her sleep at age 93. She had no living relatives, and her body wasn't discovered for nearly a week. The episodes escalated. Sarah experienced paralysis every few nights, always accompanied by Edith's presence. The elderly woman seemed fascinated by Sarah, touching her hair, examining her face, sometimes appearing to speak though no sound emerged. "What does she want from me?" Sarah asked desperately. Dark circles ringed her eyes from sleep deprivation. I suggested we move, but Sarah was determined to understand what was happening. She began keeping a journal, documenting each encounter. Patterns emerged. Edith appeared most often when Sarah was stressed or sad, and her touch seemed gentle rather than malicious. The breakthrough came when Sarah noticed something during an episode. "She's crying," Sarah told me the next morning. Edith was crying and saying something over and over. I convinced Sarah to try lip reading during the next encounter. 3 nights later, Sarah decoded Edith's message. "I'm so lonely. Please don't leave me alone." My heart broke. Edith had spent her final decades in isolation, growing increasingly dependent on the familiarity of her apartment. Death hadn't freed her. It had trapped her in eternal solitude. Sarah made a compassionate decision. Instead of fighting the paralysis, she began mentally responding to Edith during episodes. She couldn't speak aloud, but she discovered she could communicate through thoughts and emotions. "I told her we're not leaving," Sarah explained, "that she doesn't have to be alone anymore." The dynamic shifted. Edith still appeared during paralysis episodes, but her demeanor changed from desperate to grateful. She would sit quietly beside Sarah, sometimes holding her hand, finding comfort in simple human companionship. We learned to live with our unusual roommate. Sarah's episodes became less frequent and less frightening. Sometimes I'd wake to find Sarah smiling peacefully during paralysis, as if she and Edith were sharing pleasant conversation. The arrangement worked for 6 months until the night everything changed. Sarah woke from an episode looking profoundly sad. Edith said goodbye, she whispered. She said she's ready to leave now. She's not afraid of being alone anymore because she remembers what it feels like to have friends. That night, for the first time, I saw Edith myself. She appeared at the foot of our bed, a small, elderly woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She looked at Sarah with deep gratitude, then at me with something like blessing. "Thank you for sharing her with me," Edith said, her voice like whispered memory. "I remember now what love looks like." She faded away like morning sunlight, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and the feeling of peace. Sarah never experienced sleep paralysis again. We lived in the apartment for 2 more years without incident. When we finally moved to a larger place, we left behind fresh flowers and a small framed photo of us with a note. For Edith, who taught us that loneliness ends when we choose to care for each other. The new tenants report nothing unusual. Edith found her peace and moved on. But sometimes, in quiet moments, Sarah and I feel a gentle presence. Not frightening, but loving. A reminder that compassion can transform even the darkest experiences into something beautiful. The antique mirror was a housewarming gift from my grandmother when I moved into my studio apartment. It was ornate, with an elaborately carved wooden frame dating back to the 1920s. Despite its age, the silver backing was pristine, offering a crystal-clear reflection. I hung it on the wall opposite my bed, where it caught the morning light beautifully. My grandmother mentioned it had been in our family for generations, passed down through her mother's side. The sleep paralysis began 3 weeks later. I'd experienced the condition once before during college. A brief, terrifying episode where I couldn't move for about 30 seconds. This was different. These episodes lasted longer and came with vivid hallucinations. During each episode, I saw a man in the mirror. He looked like me, but wrong. Older, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. While I lay paralyzed, he would move independently of my reflection, sometimes pressing his hands against the mirror's surface, as if trying to break through. My rational mind insisted it was just sleep paralysis hallucinations. The mirror theory made sense. Our brains often incorporate familiar objects into sleep disturbances. But the episodes were becoming more frequent and intense. The man in the mirror began trying to communicate. During one particularly long episode, I watched him mouth words repeatedly. I couldn't hear his voice, but his lips clearly formed. "Let me out." I researched the mirror's history through family records. It had belonged to my great-great-grandmother, Helen Morrison, who died in 1942. What I discovered in newspaper archives chilled me. Helen hadn't died naturally. She'd been murdered by her twin brother, Henry, who'd then taken his own life. The crime occurred in Helen's bedroom, where she'd been found strangled in front of her antique mirror. Henry's suicide note rambled about jealousy and resentment. He'd always felt overshadowed by his sister, believing she'd stolen his opportunities and happiness. The note ended with a disturbing line: "If I can't have her life, I'll take her place." My grandmother had never mentioned we were related to Henry Morrison. The episodes escalated. The man in the mirror, who I now realized was Henry, became more aggressive. During paralysis, I'd watch him rage silently, pounding on the mirror's surface. Sometimes the reflection would change, showing not my bedroom but what appeared to be an older version of the same room. I tried covering the mirror, but the episodes continued. Even draped in cloth, I could sense Henry's presence, feel his malevolent attention. He'd been trapped in the mirror for 80 years, and somehow my presence had awakened him. The worst episode came on a stormy Thursday night. The paralysis lasted nearly 10 minutes. during which Henry's reflection became increasingly solid. I watched in horror as he pressed his entire body against the mirror's surface, the glass actually beginning to bow outward. "You look like her," he whispered, and this time I could hear him. "But you're not her. You'll do, though. You'll do." I realized Henry wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to switch places, to trap me in the mirror while he took my life, just as he'd obsessed over taking Helen's. The next morning, I called my grandmother and told her everything. After a long silence, she spoke quietly. "I was wondering when he'd find you. You have Helen's eyes, her face. You're the first family member to resemble her so closely. You knew about this? Henry's haunted that mirror for decades. We thought we'd contained him by keeping it in storage. But when you needed furniture..." She sighed. "I'd hoped you'd be safe. I was wrong." My grandmother revealed that Henry had appeared to other family members over the years, but never as aggressively as with me. My resemblance to Helen had awakened his obsession. Together, we researched ways to break the connection. The solution was surprisingly simple. Henry's attachment was to Helen's reflection, not the mirror itself. By changing my appearance significantly, we might confuse his recognition. I cut my hair short and dyed it black. I lost 15 pounds and changed my style completely. For the next month, I slept on the couch with the mirror covered. When I finally uncovered it, Henry was there, but different. Confused. His reflection searched the mirror frantically, unable to lock onto my changed appearance. Over the following weeks, his image grew fainter until he disappeared entirely. I kept the mirror but moved it to the living room, away from where I sleep. My grandmother and I performed a small cleansing ritual, asking Helen's spirit to find peace and Henry's to move on. The sleep paralysis ended, but sometimes in peripheral vision, I catch a flicker of movement in the mirror, not threatening now, just sad. Perhaps Henry finally understands the difference between love and possession. The mirror remains in my family, but with new protections. Future generations will know its history and the importance of not resembling Helen too closely. Some obsessions transcend death, but they don't have to transcend understanding. That concludes tonight's case. But the shadows don't sleep. I'm Dr. Haunted. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights low, and your nightmares closer.